Welcome to the Kick Sugar Coach podcast. Join me each week as I interview experts who will share the science of sugar, sugar addiction, and different approaches to recovery. We hope to empower you with the information and inspiration, insights, and strategies you need to break up with sugar and fall in love with healthy whole foods so you can prevent and reverse chronic disease, lose weight, boost your mood and energy. Feel free to go to my website for details on my coaching programs and to access free resources, kicksugarcoach.com. I have with me today Chef AJ, and I would like you, if you're sitting, to just take a deep breath. And if you're driving, make sure you're buckled up because you're in for a ride. Chef AJ is an internet celebrity. She has been devoted to a whole food plant-based diet for over 45 years. She is the host of a television series called Healthy Living with Chef AJ, which is aired on Foodie TV. She's a chef, a culinary instructor, professional speaker. She's the author of best-selling books, one of which is The Secrets to Ultimate Weight Loss, a revolutionary approach to conquer cravings, overcome food addiction, and lose weight without going hungry. She has a book called Unprocessed, which is just entering its 10th anniversary edition. She also has courses and programs, and she has every single day since 2020 gone live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, sharing her passion for the topic of whole foods. And she was the executive pastry chef at Sante Restaurant in Los Angeles, where she was famous for her vegan desserts that were sugar-free, oil-free, salt-free, and gluten-free. And yes, they're still desserts and they still rock people's world. She is proud to say that her IQ is higher than her cholesterol. And this is the piece de resistance. She is celebrating her 20th year of being a whole food woman, sugar-free, and her 12th year of being flour-free. Welcome, Chef AJ.
Thank you. Yeah. If I had known about flour when I knew about sugar, I could have claimed that as well. But it's great. I celebrated 20 years off of sugar at Rancho La Puerta in Mexico with 35 other people, just, in a place where they don't serve sugar. They serve food from the garden. Food is grown, fruits and vegetables. Yeah, it's amazing. I haven't had a Coke Slurpee in over 20 years.
And one thing I didn't mention in your bio, and for people who aren't familiar with you, is that Chef AJ used to be obese. And
yes. Because I really think that once you deal with the food addiction, the weight really does take care of itself. I didn't know about food addiction.
What inspired you to actually give up flour? Like, why? What made you?
Well, I can tell you, the lady, wonderful lady. I think she's on your summit, Dr. Jo Niflin. I read her book, Sugar and Flour, How They Make Us Crazy, Fat, and Sick, or Crazy, Sick, and Fat. And I'm like, wow, so it's not just sugar that's the problem. It's pretty much all refined carbohydrate, not carbohydrate. I'm not talking about rice, beans, and sweet potatoes, but all refined processed carbohydrates. So I think of sugar, flour, and alcohol, it's all the same as far as I'm concerned. If you have a problem with one, you probably have a problem with all of them.
Right. And there's people who will dig in there. They'll say, I don't have a problem, Florence, with flour. I really don't. It doesn't seem to trigger cravings. I can't think of a good reason to give up the flour. Sugar for sure. There's no off button. I have aches and pains and headaches, and I feel sick and hungover, and I feel crappy, and I'm diabetic and all those things. But flour, I seem to be able to do it in moderation. Why can't I? What would you say to that?
Well, the thing is, I don't think you know what you have a problem with until you're willing to do a brief period or an experiment with abstinence and do without it. And then you'll know whether you have a problem. Because first of all, people say, well, I don't have a problem with alcohol. I just choose to drink every day. Well, then let's go 21 days without. Oh, I can't do that. See, the thing is how do you know whether or not you really have a problem until you're willing to give it up for just a brief period to see how you feel? So the thing is, I look at things a couple of different ways. And one is not just does it trigger your food addiction or cause you to overeat or cause you to gain weight, but is it really a healthy food? And I look at food as healthy if it's a whole food. And that doesn't mean we don't process our food at all, Florence. So for example, if somebody wants to make hummus, taking some, beans and some lemon and some garlic in the food processor, okay, that's processed, but it's not ultra processed. It's not refined. It doesn't have a long list of ingredients. And flour today is not the flour of our ancestors. And I just feel that because if it's high caloric density, it's high glycemicness. If somebody has to have bread, here's the funny thing. I haven't had any bread or flour in 12 years, but now I make these raw vegan wraps out of vegetables. So it's like a bread. In other words, it's I can eat it like bread, doesn't taste exactly like bread. So I can create in my recipes missing for people that are looking for that. But, bread is just, I think about what was it, Jack LaLanne that said, the whiter your bread, the sooner you're dead. I just feel like if it's not a whole food, then does it really have a place in your diet if you're struggling with food addiction? And if you're overweight, my skinny husband doesn't have any addictions. He eats like a sandwich every day. It's not a problem. But like you say, if you have aches and pains, if you're not feeling your best, if you're not at the weight that you desire, bread is 1,500 calories a pound. The whole grain that the bread was made from is 500 calories per pound.
Yes. Got it. So those two pieces, the calorie density and the concentration of sugars are the two, and I'm assuming you're going to probably add salt in there, are the ones that really hijack our appetite. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. I might add 5. I might do a 5. So a lot of people talk about, being sugar free or being flour free. I'm actually SOFAS free, SOFAS, sugar, oil, flour, alcohol, salt. And, I make a joke that if you want to lose weight and feel your best, get off the sofa.
Get off the sofa.
Literally and figuratively. And so, of course, we can't paint everybody with the same brush. And just because one is sensitive to a certain item or ingredient doesn't mean everybody is. But the thing about sugar and flour and alcohol, to me, like I said, they're pretty much the same. They don't exist in nature, and not in the way that people eat them. I mean, the sugar in nature, it would be fruit. The flour, well, there really is there any flour in nature? I've never seen it. Is there any alcohol in nature? Maybe if some grapes fell off the tree and fermented. But these are highly processed foods that you don't see in nature. And I always say that a wise man once told me that if you want to solve a problem, look to nature. And I always say if something isn't available in nature, and if you can't easily make it in your own kitchen, it's probably something that you really shouldn't be consuming that much of. Like for example, I don't recommend people, use cocaine, but the leaf that it comes from, it's found in nature. And sometimes people would take it as a mild stimulant and chew that leaf, and it really wasn't a problem. It was like having a cup of coffee. Or the stevia leaf, for example. I mean, that's found in nature, and maybe some people use it in a recipe, but the people today that use stevia aren't really taking that green leaf. They're concentrating it, they're refining it, so it's thousands of times sweeter in this little dropper full of liquid or powder. And then it's no longer a whole food that's found in nature. And so a lot of doctors that I work with, they talk about the SOS-free diet, sugar, oil, salt-free diet. But the reason I added flour and alcohol is because I was working with people, that said, oh, I'm a sugar addict, but they were still eating bread and flour and cake, and they were still drinking alcohol. And they were wondering, well, why aren't I getting any results? I'm not losing any weight. I'm still craving sugar. All 3 of these things have a very high caloric density. I mean, sugar and flour, they have 4 calories per gram. So they're not is calorically dense as, say, oil, which is 9 calories a gram, but alcohol, 7 calories a gram. And again, these are refined carbohydrates. And, are they something that's really going to add to your health or subtract for your health? I know people will find studies like, oh, well, red wine has resveratrol, but you know what? It's not because of the wine, it's because of the grapes. And so, always seek the whole food first. And I think people that are eating only whole foods, whether they're plant-based or not, aren't going to be in the same kind of trouble with their weight or addiction as people that are eating processed foods, sugar, flour, alcohol, for example. And like I said, until you go through a period of experimentation or abstinence away from these, you really don't know if you have an addiction or your problem. Because if you can't do it, then I would say if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, it's a duck. But Florence, nobody likes that word addiction. Nobody likes it.
No, I know. I agree with you, because we all think, oh, that means I have to abstain. I have to be like an alcoholic and never drink again. And life would not be worth it. It just would hardly be worth living without all these fun foods. But what's been your experience on the other side of all your sofas?
Yeah, well, my experience is that it's very difficult to do this, because you can't really, I don't know if one ever overcomes an addiction, but you can certainly manage it. But I will tell you that as difficult as it is for many people, I've never met anyone that once they got to the other side said, boy, life was so much better when I had these 100 extra pounds, when I was diabetic, when I was drunk every night. It's so hard that, I hear that a lot. People say, I would rather die than give up blank. And that, this isn't a court-ordered program. It's definitely a person's choice. But I will tell you that for the people that can get to the other side, I've all heard them say that the freedom from the addiction, from being in the clutches of these constant cravings and food compulsions, feels better than they did when they were using. But when you're using, I think your judgment is clouded about things. And so you are going to say things like that. But to me, the fact that you're saying that means you're an addict, because who would say they would rather die than give up whatever that is, other than an addict? I think a non-addicted person wouldn't say that, would they?
No, that totally makes sense. That's right. I mean, if you're not addicted and you can truly take it or leave it, well, then please leave it. Just leave it. And if it terrifies you, the thought of just eating whole foods, maybe you have been hijacked. Maybe your brain lights up like a Christmas tree on these processed carbohydrates, and that there's a dynamic in play that you think you're free. You think you're choosing these foods, but there's less agency in there than you probably are willing to admit, because it's terrifying to think I've lost control. What brought you to that moment when you decided enough? No sugar, no sweeteners, no alcohol. I'm done. I mean, I know that you still kept flour in, but what was that moment?
Right. Well, the only reason I kept flour in is because, like most people, I thought, bread, the staff of life. I didn't know it was deleterious to not to everyone, but to people that are sensitive to the effects of sugar and flour, which, by the way, go through the same refining process of drugs and alcohol. I did not know. Had I known, I might have been able to do it sooner, because it wasn't like, flour didn't have the same draw to me as, say, sugar. But what happened to me is I'm 63. And when I was 43 years old and 60 pounds heavier than I am now, I woke up on January 1st, 2003, and I was bleeding internally. And it turned out I had what they call precancerous polyps in my sigmoid colon. These are, I think they were called edematous polyps, and they're the kind that, if not removed, always turn to cancer. And I have a strong family history of colon cancer. My grandmother died of it. My uncle had almost his entire colon removed. And so when I went and had the colonoscopy to see what was going on, normally they just remove the polyps during the outpatient procedure, because there's like these calipers that kind of like take them. Well, the doctor said that my colon was so dirty, he used the word dirty, in such a state of disarray that he could not get a clean shot to safely remove them. So I'd have to come back and have actual surgery under general anesthesia, where they cut into my colon. And I'm like, no, thank you. I am afraid. This is the one thing in life, my fear of general anesthesia, because at the age of 19, I was having just a very minor procedure as an outpatient. I was allergic to the anesthetic and almost died. I was resuscitated in the hospital for 6 weeks, almost put on a ventilator. I'm deathly afraid of general anesthesia. And so for me, eating better was a much nicer option than having to have surgery. And so what I did is, just to buy some time, I went to a place, and I didn't know anything about this. Is so funny. I really do believe in divine intervention, because I didn't know anything about this place. It's called the Optimum Health Institute. There's one campus in Austin, Texas, that I actually ended up going to later, but I went to the one in Lemon Grove, California. And the reason I went there is my dream was always to go to a spa. And I'm really blessed that for the last 12 years, I've been teaching at the best spa in the world, Rancho La Puerta. But back then, I certainly didn't have the money for Rancho La Puerta. But I had this magazine about discount spas. And in it, it was $807. Well, first of all, Optimum Health Institute is not a spa, so don't get your hopes up. It's a place of healing. But it was $875 for 8 days. And I'm like, that's really reasonable for like San Diego. I didn't know what it was, but luckily I'm an adventurous person, and I'm like, I just need to get away. I need to think. I took the train down to San Diego. I was living in LA at the time, and boy, were my eyes open. It's a fabulous place, by the way, as is the True North Health Center, where you could achieve the same kind of healing, I believe. And what it is, it's it's different things to different people. So some people use it for detox, because when I was there, it was July 6, 2003, which is the date that I claim abstinence from sugar, there were a lot of local football players from the San Diego team there. They were just trying to drop weight, because I guess football players have to be weighed before the season or whatever. There were some famous actors and actresses there, and just regular people like me from all over the world. And every Friday, it was a 3-week program. I was only able to do 1 week at a time, but people would give testimonials on how eating the way Optimum Health Institute teaches help them. And people were there that have overcome I didn't know about food addiction then, but people had overcome lupus, Lyme's disease, brain cancer, all these diseases that we think of as incurable or difficult to cure by going on the diet. So what was the diet? Well, in their case, it was raw. I don't think people have to be 100% raw to heal, but it was whole plants. They were not cooked. There was a lot of juicing. There was a lot of green vegetables. There was no sofas. There was no sugar, oil, flour, alcohol, salt, or any kind of caffeine like coffee or stimulants or chocolate, for example. And the doctors and the nurses that run the program, and it's a wonderful, I haven't been there in 18 years, because I did go back in 2005 for like a refresher, but the doctors and nurses that teach the classes, which go from like 7 a.m. till 9 p.m., one of the principles they taught was that for any disease to exist in the body, and you notice that many diseases have the word itis afterwards, like inflammation of, that your body has to be in a state of inflammation. And that all the foods that I was eating, even though they were vegan, were inflammatory foods. And so if you want to heal, you have to eat anti-inflammatory foods. Whether you have a common cold or cancer, you want to be on an anti-inflammatory diet. Whole foods is found as nature. So any kind of processed food is going to be inflammatory, whether it's a vegan processed, cheese or a processed meat product. So I was doing good not eating certain things, but, having Coke Slurpee every day for breakfast and Dr. Pepper for lunch, sugar and caffeine, that's not exactly health promoting. And it wasn't just the bad stuff I was eating. I was so addicted to sugar that really was all I ate, that I wasn't eating any whole foods. I'm this vegan for ethical reasons since the age of 17, but my husband would joke, you're the only vegan that doesn't eat any vegetables. I wasn't eating any fruits and vegetables. A little broccoli would sneak in here and there. I never ate fruit because fruit, God forbid, fruit was not sweet enough to me. Now it's exceedingly sweet. So I went there and, I'll tell you, detox is a bitch, which is why, and it doesn't last long though, guys. It's not like coming off, I've never taken heroin or cocaine or alcohol. I'm sure it's not as difficult as coming off those drugs, which is why I think a lot of people, especially doctors, don't like to call it an addiction. So there's not that kind of detox. You're not going to die when you stop having sugar and flour, but there is some discomfort, which only takes a few days for most people. But if you're in a place like True North or Optimum Health, where you're at complete rest, you're not working, the kids aren't running around and screaming, you can do it. You just need to take that time for yourself. And I had a lot of headaches having sugar as my primary source of calories for 43 years to going to none of it, and especially no caffeine, that's a hard thing to stop too. I had headaches for, several days. I had nausea. I had diarrhea, but the thing is it passed, because I was being fed this organic, beautiful, salads and juices and things that they had there. They made these seed cheeses out of sunflower seeds and sesame seeds. And, when I got to the other side, this is the most beautiful part, I think it's Dr. Iflin that talks about the calm, stable brain. When I was in the throes of food addiction, sugar addiction, all I could think about is when I'm going to get my next fix. I would wake up in the morning, I could barely open my eyes, and some days I couldn't even get to 7-Eleven safely in the car, and I'd make my husband, I enabled him, go get me a Slurpee. And then, it's just a matter of time till I need another fix, and back to 7-Eleven for a 48-ounce Dr. Pepper Big Gulp, and always thinking, when am I going to get my fix again? When, and thinking about what it was going to be, and just eating egregious amounts of candies, cakes, cookies, pies, and ice creams, albeit vegan ones. And the cool thing is I remember I was dropped off at I was picked up at the train station on July 6, 2003 by a cab driver. And I said, take me to 7-Eleven. Again, this is the thing, how people, when they start a diet, like they have like a big binge the night before. And I'm like, because I heard that at Optimum Health, if you're found with any contraband, you're going to get kicked out and you're not going to get your money back. And I'm kind of a frugal person that way. So he took me to 7-Eleven. I got a Coke Slurpee and a Dr. Pepper. And it's not even that enjoyable when you're trying to drink them both at the same time just to get it over with. And it was and then I get there at 4:00, and the first dinner, Sunday night dinner there, it's funny because they open it to the public. So to give you a taste of it, I'm like the worst thing I ever ate. I don't remember what it was. It was some kind of salad without it was really shoot me now. I get it, people. I get it. I've been there. And that one of the reasons I don't relapse is because I don't want to have to go through that again, where my food doesn't taste good and all that stuff. So, but when I got to the end of the week, I remember by the next Saturday, when I took the train back to LA, I was just so calm. I was serene. I was peaceful. So much so that when I came home, the two dogs that I had in the time, they didn't bark joyously, or they were sniffing me. It was almost like drug sniffing dogs. Like, where's the drugs? And it's like, I can't speak for them, but it was almost like, who's this? Who is this person? You know? So that was pretty profound, even though I hadn't lost weight or much weight at the time. So that was pretty cool. So, you know, all I can say is, if you do it, it's hard at first. It doesn't stay hard, especially if you get a community to support you and you follow some of the tips and tricks of the speakers on this summit. But it's a beautiful thing to have the feeling of overcoming an addiction. And, you know, like I say, I mean, to me, 20 years, it's like, that's amazing, because some people can't go 20 minutes, let alone 20 days. But, you know, I wish that for everybody, that they could feel what sobriety feels like, and then tell me that they would rather die without their drug, you know?
Incredible. What's astonishing is that within 7 days, you got to that calm brain. That was really quick.
Yeah. And I think, 7 days it took to get to the calm brain and not to have the cravings. But of course, it's not just a matter of being abstinent from the stuff. You got to put good stuff in, you know, right? So I'm putting in like the highest quality, highest nutrient fruits and vegetables that are organically grown there. I think it's important to put good things in, you know, like vegetables. And you know, one of the things I want to say is, regardless of what diet you follow, having a plan abstinent of sugar, I think, and possibly flour too, could help you in many ways. But you got to eat vegetables. See, this is the hardest thing for people to understand. I know there's a big thing about fruit, which I don't agree with at all, but I can't imagine anyone telling people not to eat vegetables on any diet plan. And that's one of the best things you can eat to help combat your cravings for sugar. Not just every vegetable, because, you know, things like cherry tomatoes and cucumber and zucchini, while healthy, these are actually fruit, believe it or not. But dark green leafy vegetables, they are magical. I hated them at first, because the more acidic you are from eating this kind of standard American diet or high sugar diet, the worse these alkaline foods that you need are going to taste. But if you just keep eating them, you know, things like the bitter things like kale and Brussels sprouts, there's this magical compound in them. I didn't discover it. It's called thylakoids that somehow help people with sugar cravings. They help turn off your hunger switch. They block fat absorption. And so that's why I recommend not only people eat as many vegetables as possible, as many dark green leafy, but start their day with them, whether it's in the form of a smoothie or, in my case, steamed vegetables. There is something about vegetables that is enormously helpful. It's just that the more a person eats junk food and sugar and flour, the less likely they're going to want to eat vegetables or like them. And again, this has to do with this concept, which I talk about a lot in my work, called caloric density, because the more calorically concentrated the calories in a food, the more dopamine is released, which is why people like processed food and animal products better than whole plant foods, because they are so much higher in caloric density. Where vegetables are 100 calories per pound, oil is 4,000 calories per pound. What's going to give you more dopamine? But if you can just train yourself, even if all you eat all day is Big Macs, if you could just train yourself that every morning you're going to eat a pound of dark green leafy vegetables, first of all, you may not want that Big Mac, but it's going to do something remarkable for your health. And I can't explain it, but I see it all the time. And then when I see people relapse, one of the first habits, I stopped eating vegetables. You got to eat vegetables. Everybody has to. Kids, I love Dr. Nicole Lavina, because she talks a lot about this, about how, it's pretty easy to get people and kids to eat fruit because it's sweet and delicious, but you've got to start that vegetable eating at a young age. And I didn't. And look what happened to me. I weighed almost 200 pounds with the beginning of colon cancer. That's what happens when you eat a fiberless diet. And think about it. Sugar has no fiber. A flour has maybe some, usually it's added back in. But again, if everything you eat has fiber and water together intact, you're I don't want to say you're home free, but you're on a good trajectory.
And that's been my personal experience with leafy greens, that I've been in this space long enough to know that there are people who, for some reason or another, don't process vegetables very well, excruciating pain, IBS, whatever. I get that there's medical exceptions, but over time, as the digestion heals, I've heard that they can reintroduce them, and that it does make a difference for energy, for mood, for cravings, so many good things. And actually, the only true source of minerals, or the major source of minerals from our diet, comes from vegetables.
Absolutely. And, I personally have struggled with IBS. So I would say to that person, get a consultation with a really good GI doctor, or do something with one of the True North doctors, because I believe that there's always a way for people to eat vegetables. Maybe they can't eat raw vegetables, but most people can eat vegetables that are very well steamed, that are pureed, maybe in the form of a smoothie or a soup. So I wouldn't sell yourself short and just say, I have this, therefore I cannot eat vegetables. There's always some way to include them, even if it's in the form of like a green powder or something. But I think that not eating vegetables is a mistake. I believe you've had Dr. Furman on your summit before, and he always says, if you don't like vegetables, you better live close to a hospital.
Wow, powerful line. Tell us about the tips and tricks then. What are some of the best wisdom that you have to share about how to achieve what you've achieved? 20 years being a whole food woman. Well, at least no sugar.
Well,
12
yeah.
years, whole food woman.
I hate to say this, but it seems that the most of the people I've worked with, they have to hit some kind of a rock bottom to make a change, because they always, I'm going to do it someday. I'm going to do it someday. Well, I didn't have a choice, because to me, having surgery and being under the threat of a surgeon's knife was enough fire under my butt to finally change my diet. And it's unfortunate that most people do wait usually until the 11th hour, until they're diagnosed with diabetes or before they have to go on insulin, or when their weight is such an issue that they finally have to do something about it. So I think the first thing is you have to really want it. I remember this has nothing to do with food, but I had a wonderful acting teacher 40 years ago, and people would say her name was Joan Darling, and like, do I have it? Do I have it? Meaning, do I have what it takes to be a big star, like some of these people that are in your class? And she'd go, it depends. And we'd go, what depends on what? Well, how bad do you want it? And so that's the thing. I think you have to really want it. They talk about this thing called your why, the why that makes you cry. You have got to want it for yourself, not because your husband tells you need to lose weight or because the doctor tells you need to lose weight. You have really got to want it, because if you don't really want this for yourself, it's going to be hard, but you have to have this compelling reason to do it every day. And, looking good for your daughter's wedding or for your 40th high school reunion, that is a very short-term why. It has to be bigger than that. And so my why is I will do anything to not, have general anesthesia or surgery. That's, to me, that's the biggest, scariest thing in the world. And so you have to figure that out for yourself. Why do you want it? And, some people don't. Some people just don't want it bad enough. And the people that I've seen success, they really, really wanted it. They really, really wanted it. So you have to want it, and you have to figure out why. And until you find that internal reason, I don't know if you're going to be successful, because then it will just be a diet and you'll do it for a little bit and you won't stick to it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What are some of the big whys that you've seen that stick?
Well, usually it involves children and grandchildren, so that's why I haven't worked with a lot of young people, but it's hard because they're so young. Like, and again, the youngest person I think I've ever had in a program was 19 or 20, because I think most of us know that when we're young, we feel like we're invincible. We're never going to die. I don't think most teenagers or 20-year-olds feel. So they feel that they have a long time of living and partying before it catches up with them, So most people I know, their compelling why was usually to be around for their family, to take care of, because mostly I work with women. So to be around for their family, but especially to walk their daughter down the aisle, to be able to play with their grandchildren, not on oxygen or from a wheelchair. Those are the whys that I have seen be very successful for people. Like even people trying to quit smoking. It seems like, those are the whys that I see a lot of times. It's not usually just so I can fit into a bikini and look good on social media. Well, that may be somebody's why, and that's a good enough why if it's your why. But a lot of times for people, when they do get on medicine for lifestyle diseases, I think a lot of people, they maybe have not seen Forks Over Knives or read the China study. They don't realize that I would say all of these lifestyle diseases like hypertension, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disease, and even certain cancers are a result of lifestyle, a result of what you put in your mouth, and that you can actually not only prevent them by eating a whole food diet, but even reverse them. And so for a lot of people, they'll go on these medicines and they'll actually feel worse, not better. And so when I think feeling good is a really wonderful motivator, which is why if you can get to a place like a True North Health Center or, an inpatient place. Online programs are wonderful, don't get me wrong, but there still could be too much temptation in your home where you're with like-minded people and you're all detoxing together. When you can get to that place of that calm, stable brain or feel how good you feel, it can, until you start to feel good, you don't always know how bad you felt, because a lot of people don't realize you get used to, you neuroadapt to all the aches and pains in your body. You start to think that that's normal. But then when you start to feel better, you're like, wow, I like this better. And so sometimes just doing a 21-day experiment, if you can, off these toxic, and I say toxic because I believe they are, foods, I don't believe they're foods, when you start to feel better, that can be a motivator to do it, or to continue doing it because, yeah.
You have the lived experience. Your body's starting to say, oh, I was wrong to fight you on this. I do feel better. I'm in. It becomes your ally. I have found it takes usually longer than 21 days, but for you, it took only 7, which is amazing.
Well, no, the reason I said 20, listen, I think it'd take 3 months, to be honest, 4 months for some people. But the thing is a lot of people can't think that, that far out. That's what procrastination is, something that human beings do because they think, well, I'll just, I may not have to do it. The reason I say 21 days is because I think if you give people a small, you want to renew it after day 22. But if you say to them, you can never have sugar or flour or alcohol again, they're like, forget it. And so 3 or 4 months seems like an eternity to people, especially people that struggle with addiction. But the one reason I like 21 days is because there's a lot of programs that are 21 days, PCRM Kickstart, for example, but also because I know people that were addicts that could still, in the name of religion, do something for Lent that was difficult. I've seen people that smoke that have given up cigarettes for that religious period, or given up chocolate, or given up alcohol. So I figured if you can do something for 40 days, maybe you could do it for 21 days. And of course, you're right. It's probably not long enough, especially if somebody has been addicted to these foods for a long time. But I think it could give them some good information to see if they're going to feel better. I think part of the reason that people struggle so much is because there's just so much dissension in the medical world about whether or not food is an addiction, which is why I really respect people like Dr. Vera Tarman, who is a medical doctor who runs an inpatient treatment center that really looks at it in the lens of an addiction. And of course, we're not, we're not saying that if you're addicted to heroin or methamphetamine, that's not more serious. But what's difficult about food as an addiction is you have to eat. You don't have to take hardline drugs or alcohol or smoke. You don't even have to drink coffee, but you got to eat sometime. And you're faced with this decision, 1, 2, 3 or more times a day. And you live in a social environment that makes it almost impossible to succeed. I think about this story that I used to hear from a gentleman. His name is the Reverend O.C. Smith. And I don't know if you're old enough to remember a song, God Didn't Make Little Green Apples, that he made famous in the 60s. And he would talk about how when a fisherman catches crabs in a bucket, to eat them, some of the crabs are smart enough to figure out if they crawl on the other crabs, they can actually crawl out to the bucket to their freedom. But the other crabs just pull them back down to their death. And unfortunately, that's what people's social environment is often like, because I think not only does misery like company, addicts like company. And if you're in a family setting or a social setting where everybody else is continuing the behavior and you're the odd man out, it can be difficult. It can be very difficult to change. I know people that have stopped drinking, not to be holier than thou, because maybe they had like a little heart thing. Their doctor said, you can't drink alcohol anymore. And I've heard so many people say, well, we lost all our friends because we're not fun anymore, because we can't drink anymore. And it's the same thing if you're eating crap food. Everybody does it. Hey, why are over 70% of Americans overweight and more than half of them obese? If it's not an addiction, what is it? Our genes haven't changed that quickly. So it's really, like Dr. Frank Sabatino says, food is the only addiction that you can just do in public. You can do it at your desk at work. You can do it at your desk in school. I mean, they encourage it. Look at all the crap they bring at school birthday parties and at, soccer games. And if God forbid you raise your kid without sugar, what a terrible parent you are. You're denying them. So I think the whole conversation has to change. I mean, the food they serve at school is deplorable. People are like, I love the work of Dr. Colavino talks about what the mother eats when she's pregnant is going to affect what their preferences are. It's just, it's a tough conversation because everybody, just because everybody's doing it doesn't mean it's normal. There was a time in human history where there was child labor, and there probably still is in parts of the world, or when everybody thought the world was flat. Just because everybody's doing it doesn't mean it's right and that you should do it. Dare to be different, never be afraid to be part of the minority when the minority is right.
Oh my gosh, totally. And when you think about the fact, if sugar, in fact, is addictive, it is an addictive substance. And every lab that has ever studied it, starting with Dr. Nicole Levine, and has been replicated around the world hundreds of times, peer-reviewed medical journals have reported on it, and they will say there's no difference between how lab animals, mice and rats, respond to morphine and cocaine and sugar. Same. They withdraw the same. It appears to be an opiate or a substance of potential use and abuse like any other drug that we study in our labs. So let's say sugar is addictive. It's a known addictive substance, or at least some of us know it's an addictive substance. That is the only addictive substance that we allow children to have exposure to. We protect them from vaping, restricted movies, porn, hopefully, alcohol, like gambling. They can't go, like, we protect children from addictive substances. This is the only substance that we do not protect children from.
Oh, not only don't we protect them, but we addict them at an early age, and we make them customers for life with all the, like, for example, if you've ever gone to a regular grocery store and you think about eye level and shelf space, right? You know, those processed cereals aren't up high or down low. They're right at the level where the mom pushing the basket, where that kid can see it and have a fit and cry if they don't get their, you know, sugar frosted whatever with the toy. And then the marketing to children and the commercials. You know, I remember even as young as I was in the 60s, you know, seeing commercials that when I think back now, wow, they really were targeting it to children, you know, because they were during the you know, they weren't during like wasn't during 60 Minutes. It was during, you know, the Flintstones, you know, during the cartoons. And so, yeah, they are marketing it to children too. So it's hard because, you know, Americans eat, you know what, last time I checked, 92% of their calories from animal products and processed food, less than 10% from fruits and vegetables, and something like 67 to 72% processed food. Some people probably 100%. That's why I don't like that we call it food. You know, I think it was, is it Michael Pollan or someone says we should call it food like substances or a science experiment, because just because you can eat it doesn't mean you should. And I mean, if you really go to a supermarket and take out the processed food, you know what you're left with is the produce section. I mean, it's just incredible how much processed food there is. And I remember growing up in the 60s, you know, things like Tang and Space Food sticks and Pop-Tarts and figurines. And, you know, these things were, you know, well, they were tasty, of course, because they know how much sugar, fat, and salt to put into, you know, to hijack your taste buds and addict your brain chemistry. And I think if people would get educated on the science, reading books like Sugars and Flours, How They Make Us Crazy, Fat, and Sick, The End of Overeating by the former head of the FDA, Dr. David Kessler, or Hooked, or Salt, Sugar, and Fat, How the Food Giants Hooked Us by investigative journalist, Pulitzer Prize-winning author Michael Moss. When I read these books, I'm like, wait a minute. So they did this on purpose. They knew this. They're, you know, making me I got so mad. I just stopped eating processed food, more as a political statement. Like, I didn't want my money to go to that. But again, even people that want that, it's really hard. Parents are busy. It's easy, you know, just because it's quicker to go through the drive-through, you think the dollar menu is cheaper. But if you look at the consequences of the dollar menu, like $400 for your diabetes medicine, you know, it's not really cheaper. But it's just so pervasive. And, you know, I'm really blessed having lived in California my whole life, which is a pretty healthy state when you compare it to, like, I have friends that live, like, you know, they call it the stroke belt or the bacon belt, where this conversation would be like either laughed at or not even listened to. But I think people, you know, with summits like yours and even mine, maybe some people are starting to wake up. So the first step is get the education, and then you need to take some kind of action on it. But even then, it's hard. I mean, I know people that I've known, like, I can think of people that came to my programs and like they knew it and they could recite it, but they couldn't do it. And then sometimes 10 years later, their aha moment, or, you know, a lot of times it always seems, you know, people don't just wake up and say, you know, what I learned on Florence's summit, that's true. I think I'm going to stop eating crap. Usually something has to happen to light a fire under your butt. And so a lot of times, like in cases of some of my female clients, it's like, you know, their husband had an affair or there's something that happens that makes them kind of like look at their whole life. And when they do that, they, you know, then they want to get better and look better and feel better. It doesn't matter a person's why, but I think you do have to have a compelling reason, because I think just wanting to be healthy and have healthy children should be compelling enough, or people seem to need some kind of something a lot of times external happen. Like, I don't know what I remember. Yeah, I do remember your recovery story. You had migraines. You did not feel well. So sometimes people have to feel worse before they feel better. And, you know, I like to quote my mentor, Dr. Ellen Goldhammer. What's it going to take? How fat and sick do you want to be? Even then, the longer I'm in this space, the more I'm just amazed at how hard this is for so many people, not just to do it long term, because we understand abstinence is a big commitment, but to even take that first step.
Absolutely. When I think about the social injustice of what's happening with food marketing, like you're talking about, to children, and the false marketing and the way that they're designed, engineered to hit our bliss point for profit. Governments are failing us for sure. They are. But I think ultimately governments are usually the last place where policies get put into play. They follow the lead of society. And if this food culture is going to turn around, it's going to be because of women. Absolutely. We are dropping the ball. It's our responsibility to feed our children healthy whole foods. It's our responsibility. We are the ones serving them as nurses in hospitals and daycares and school, as teachers. We are so embedded. We've been so co-opted into this food culture malfunction that makes companies billions of dollars, and we don't see it. And it's not going to change. If we're waiting for the government to come up with new policy, we're going to wait till our children are fat, sick, and dead. Right? And it's not going to change. It's women's. It's our responsibility. It just is. Women against drunk driving, women against added sugars, right? It's the same movement. And the African-American community did not get the vote. Women did not get the vote without years of people working really hard to fight for the rights. And if we want a food culture that's just, we have to fight for it. But first, we need to get you free, get you unhooked, get you awakened, get you to understand this is a genuine addiction and that recovery is possible. And my God, life on the other side is better. What other tips do you have for people, Chef AJ, if they start in on this path and start to become whole food men and women?
Yeah. Well, one is get some kind of support. I mean, because I feel like if you could have done it on your own, you probably would have already. And support can be, I mean, it can be a group. Like Florence has programs, I have programs. It can be a coach, can be a one-on-one thing. You can get some kind of an accountability partner. You don't even have to necessarily spend money to have somebody that you're accountable through text or emails or daily phone calls. But I feel that most people, unless they're just these diehard introverts, need some kind of support or system, just to know that they're not alone. And I think reading some of the books that we mentioned, can be very helpful, because people just really fight this term addiction. So if you don't like the word addiction, call it something else, preference or inability to stop. I think if we could have a different name for it, like Dr. Tarman says, maybe we should call it dopamine deficiency disorder. It might be easier on some people because.
Or dependency, sugar dependency.
Yeah. Proclivity, preference, or something like that. It could help people like,
Introduction.
Sorry about, oh my God.
If you want
sorry about that.
You must
That's not good.
You've never done.
Did you ever have your phone just start playing? It's funny because it just started playing a book.
So I stopped it. Concierge medical practice.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. This is
fun.
So
funny. The book that started playing is on this topic, so I apologize. Maybe you can edit that out. So, I always say the ABCs of support: accountability, a buddy, a coach. So it can be a person, it can be a program, and I just wish you could just feel how good it feels to be free from addictive substances long enough that you might want to stay and do it longer. But again, I think a person's environment is very important to a person's recovery, because like I said, I've always said, at least in terms with weight loss, but this I think would apply for food addiction as well. If it's in your house, it's in your mouth. And so I know that there are people that think that they should be able to coexist, with these addictive substances, and maybe they can, but early in a person's recovery, I think it's really hard for that substance that they've been relying on and crave to be in front of them, 24 hours a day. Maybe later on we can experiment and try to add it back in or have it in your house. I think people need to have conversations with their family and explain, that this is difficult for them. And I would really appreciate it if, you didn't bring the pepperoni pizza home and the French fries and the box of donuts, because I'm really trying hard. The thing is often addicts, are living with other addicts. And since people don't even believe in addiction, they're not, if you don't believe in addiction, you think your husband that's eating the same way is going to believe in it. Education can really help. I think I don't have the answer for everyone, other than just do an experiment, give yourself a period of time to see what it feels like off these substances. And for people that cannot even go a period of time without it, then maybe really think about going to a place like that I mentioned, Optimum Health, True North. I'm sure there's other places where you can just, calm your brain and see what it's like without it. I wish I could wave a magic wand and eliminate the detox period for people, or let them know, see into what their future could look like free of addictive substances. But, it's like, why? Look, why would all of us be saying the same thing, that abstinence is bliss? I mean, it's not a conspiracy. It's just that all of us, whether it's, I know people that were alcoholics, we just all are living better lives without these substances that destroy lives and families. And the thing about food addiction, I think, is unlike other addictions that can kill people quickly, they kill them slowly and insidiously through excess weight and diseases that do not need to occur. And, so when you look at the death certificate, like for my brother, for example, it said pancreatic cancer, but was it the fact that even though he's like the smartest guy I knew, graduated #1 at Princeton, was a medical doctor, but he couldn't control his food addictions? That's never on the death certificate,
Wow, I didn't know that about your brother.
I come from a family of morbidly obese people. And so I am not, when people say, oh, you're so thin, believe me, this is not genetics. This is hard. Well, I don't even think it's hard work anymore. It was hard work initially, but yeah. So, and also I want people to know that if you are addicted to any degree of these foods, or if you find yourself overweight or obese, it's not your fault. Genetics plays a huge role, something like 80%. But now that you're learning things about things you can control, it's kind of if you want to improve, it's your responsibility to make some changes, as difficult as they may be.
Mm-hmm. No one else is going to talk about salt. What is your concern with salt and caffeine? Those are the two.
Oh, yeah. Right. Well, that's the other thing. And in these artificial sweeteners, it's like, this is the thing. Have you ever noticed that addicts really like to bargain? They love to bargain. And if you think about in hardline drugs, I mean, how is it going to fly if somebody goes into Betty Ford, for alcoholism and says, okay, all right, I'm going to give up vodka. I'm just going to drink beer, or I'm just going to drink, alcohol on Sundays, or I'm just going to put it in a smaller, cup. They're going to laugh at you, because in drugs, it is pretty much all or nothing. And I know there's this idea of harm reduction, but my feeling is whether it's smoking or alcohol or sugar, if you could have cut down, wouldn't you have tried it already? Was it really successful? Because I think when you keep any amount of addictive substances in, it just bangs on your brain. So you have to have more and more and more. That's why I feel like the best amount of any addictive substance for something that you're addicted to is none. But people forget about, except for Dr. Joe Niflin, who talks about fat and salt, people forget about salt. And, I think salt can be a real addiction for people, especially these people you see that either you serve them food or they order food at a restaurant and they're putting salt on it before they've even tasted it. Salt is a learned preference. Every taste preference is learned. The only taste preference inherent in the human being is breast milk, which is supposed to be our natural food for the first couple of years of our life. I was raised without eating salt because my father was 50 when I was born. He had already suffered a heart attack and they put him on a no salt diet. So I didn't know any different. So the food tasted okay to me. But if you're eating a lot of salt and you add less or none, it's not going to taste good. But what people don't realize is, yes, you need sodium. It's an essential nutrient without which you die. But if you're eating a whole food diet and enough calories, you're going to get enough sodium. You're going to get at least 500 milligrams a day just from the food. Things like celery and chard and greens are very, very high in sodium. And so I'm not telling people they can never eat salt, but they should never cook with it because it dissipates. If you're going to add it, you add it at the top. But people that suffer from food addiction, I often find that salt is also a problem for them. And, salt is a very powerful appetite stimulant because they've done studies that show when you eat salt, when you salt your food, you eat about 11% more calories, usually from fatty foods, because it is a very powerful appetite stimulant. Sugar, oil, and salt, Dr. Goldhammer talks about, are not foods. They're not found in nature, not in any concentrated form, but they fool the brain satiety mechanisms that cause us to overeat. And so salt, it's like a yin yang thing. Somebody has something sweet and then they want something salty. Somebody has something salty, they want something sweet. And the thing is, if you're eating processed food, you're eating so much salt that you can't even taste. There is more salt in bread where it's hidden than even on potato chips where it's on the surface. So I always say, if you're going to use salt, use it judiciously. in the afters, we should call chefs the after as the finish, where the taste buds of your tongue can taste it. But I find that when people stop eating so much salt, they can also more easily stop eating so much sugar. I think they're connected, but most people don't, except for Dr. Goldhammer and Dr. Furman, Esther and Sabatino, Oliveira, the doctors that I know, they feel like salt is just not such a big deal. And it may not be for everybody, but again, until you take it out, do you really know if it's a problem for you? Because everybody thinks it's not until you have a period of abstinence. I think that caffeine and alcohol are terrible for people with addictions, because I think anytime you have an addiction, it doesn't matter. Don't have any other addictive substances. It's funny when people would come to my program and they're still smoking. I'm thinking, I think that's probably more important first. Let's get you off that, instead of worrying about your weight. The thing about caffeine, and I wish I've got to see if I can find you the blog post. Dr. Linda Carney did an amazing lecture about is either 17 or 19 reasons why caffeine makes it hard for you to lose weight. But the thing about caffeine is it's a drug. It's not a food. I mean, the coffee bean is found in nature, but the way you make it, it's, this is again, processed food. It's a highly addictive central nervous system stimulant. It has a 17-hour half-life. So that cup of coffee you've had in the morning can affect your ability to have deep sleep at night. And when you don't sleep well, your eating is not usually as good, because we know what it's like when people are sleep deprived or don't get enough deep sleep. And the fact that you cannot function in the morning without it, to me, most people, well, that to me smacks of an addiction. I find that people that have the coffee habit, even if they're not adding sugar to it, which most people do, or coffee made with dairy can be a very big addiction for people. They tend to have slumps in the afternoon, that they tend to have sugar cravings in the afternoon, that when they get rid of the coffee, they don't have anymore. So my feeling is addiction is addiction. Let's just get rid of all of it, if you can, and see how you feel. And I think we live in a world that's just so full of it that we don't even see it anymore as an addiction, because we see it as normal. And those of us that don't do it, we're criticized. Like, what's the matter with you? You don't drink alcohol? You don't drink coffee? You don't eat sugar? We're considered the pains in the asses. But hey, I feel great. At 63, I'm functioning better. My mind is sharp, and I don't ever want to go back to, the way I was. Mood swings and yelling. I remember when I used to go to 7-Eleven and the machine was broke. Sometimes it was, I would just scream at the clerk. Like, who does that? Like, oh, I'm going to call the corporate, because I had to get my fix. There's nothing worse than that feeling of the constant craving and the having to have. I don't like that feeling. I didn't like it. So, if you like it, then keep doing what you're doing. But I think that there's a better life in store for many people that are willing to try. And again, when I say try, it's, you may have some slips and slides, or what I like to call snacksidents, because it's not easy. And the trajectory to success is not usually a straight line. It might be for some people, you're going to have, hills and valleys. But if you just, I believe that if you just, Willie Nelson always said the definition of success is getting up one more time than you get knocked down. I think there's hope for a lot of people. And that's what's so great about these summits, is people get pumped up, they get inspired, they see people that have been successful. I mean, I love watching success stories. Rich Roll, the famous podcaster, was an alcoholic and also a junk food eater too. And he believes in food addiction. Surround yourself with this kind of, programming more than like your TV programming. That's another thing. I think a thing that helped me is I haven't had television in 5 years. And I think that has helped me stay in recovery. I mean, I do have, Netflix and stuff, but I haven't seen regular TV in almost 6 years now. And I think that can help recovery, as can exercise. That's the other thing. Most people, regardless of their weight or level of addiction, last time I checked, was it like 6% of people in America regularly exercise? It's like nobody. I mean, that will help you so much. So when it's difficult for you to make these healthier food choices, there's something like almost magical about exercise. The problem is too many people use it as like a punishment for binging or overeating or for weight loss. No. I mean, exercise isn't going to help you lose weight. There's research that shows it will help you maintain your weight loss. But what exercise does is it floods your brain with these feel-good chemicals, which is what you're doing with the food and the alcohol to medicate with. And it just makes it easier to stay on a sobriety path or on a healthy eating path, especially if you do it first thing in the morning, because it just sets you up for the day to be successful. So I think making exercise, I would say make exercise and vegetable eating non-negotiables. I think those are two places to start.
Incredible. Tell me a bit about your exercise. What does it look like? What do you do?
It looks like the spin bike right there. So I'm somebody that doesn't have a lot of time. So I'm not that I can't, but I choose not to drive to the gym, look for a parking space, wait for the class. So finally, years ago, Dr. Lyle said, just buy a bike. So I bought a used spin bike, not even a fancy Peloton. It's called Kaiser, Keiser. And I wake up in the morning, and usually between, around 6-ish. First thing I do is walk my dog. And it's not a vigorous walk because she's 12. It's more of a stroll. And then I get on that bike for 1 hour. I do it at a higher level, but I'm doing it standing because I get a better workout. And then it's just, I find like, once you exercise it kind of improves your self-esteem. You feel proud of yourself for doing it. And so if you've done something like that, you're not going to then go eat a bunch of crap food. That wouldn't make any sense. So if you can start doing that, and you can get a buddy for that. It doesn't have to be somebody on your eating path, but even a neighbor. Hey, you want to take a walk? And a lot of people say, well, I can't exercise because of my debility or disability. There is even people in wheelchairs. I have a friend who's a famous personal trainer. There's something that everyone can do. As long as you're breathing, there is something. I go for physical therapy because I injured my hip and it's in the water. And I see people that are much worse off with me, like they've had strokes and all. And I'm just saying people like to make excuses. There is something that everyone can do. You may need a physical therapist to get you started, but I do believe that there is some form of exercise, even if it's just walking in a shallow pool, that everyone can do. But you have to be committed, and it's hard. Let's face it. If this was easy, everybody would have done it, right?
Totally. Absolutely. Amazing. Is there any final words you'd like to share with us today on the topic of sugar addiction, whole foods?
I would say that if addiction isn't working for you, and if moderation isn't working for you, give abstinence a try. What have you got to lose?
Thank you so much, Chef AJ. I have twice in this interview teared up.
Aw.
Overwhelmed with love, really. I love the way you word things. I love your passion. I love your integrity. Thank you so much for this interview. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for your work, and thank you for the summit, and really best of luck to everyone. Best of health. I just want to say that just because you can't do everything doesn't mean you can't do anything. Even small incremental changes when done over time can lead to huge results. So just do something.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in this week. If you would like more interviews, more information, and more inspiration on how to break up with sugar, go to my YouTube channel, Kick Sugar Coach, or my website, kicksugarcoach.com. See you next week.